Hello, hello, hello. What is good, cool cats and kittens? I am your host, Andy Malafrina. I am setting up the stream to make sure everything is good before the great Austin paid Picard. Austin Wade Picard. Woo! Andy took an edible last night and he's still feeling silly. Not silly, just a little bit of the. Ooh, I'm still kind of tired. Let's check everything to make sure it's good before Austin gets in the fucking mix. We are live today on Twitch, on YouTube, on Rumble. I may be regretting putting this on YouTube, but I want to get it on YouTube. Okay. That's good over there. Hey, Dumbar, Dumbeezy. Dumby from down the block. What's up, baby boy? What's up, sweet, sweet child of mine? That's creepy. Okay, let's check Rumble. And we're rumbling. And we're rumbling. We are rumbling. Rumble, 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 rumble. Let me turn up these headphones. Check, check, check. Oh, that's crispy. That's crispy and clean. We're over on Rumble. I can't change the title of that, but I guess that's okay. Just starting lunch. Hell yeah, dude. Eat that lunch. Conspiracy talk with Austin Wade Picard. Naming the Twitch channel that. Okay, let's go over to Rumble's gonna just rumble. No one ever fucking watches over there. That's fine, but we'll just stream stuff places just because we can. Just because we fucking can. What's a little bit more content? All right. Do we have chat? Oh yeah, we do have chats. Hey, look at that. I can look at the chat. There we go. Perfect timing. 3 hours left to work and ran out of podcast. Well, perfect. Perfect. We got an interview coming in a couple minutes. Let me change one more thing, and then I'll bring Austin in the mix. Shut up, big boy. Shut up, big boy. Let me retitle this YouTube video, and then we could get Austin in this fucking bed. We can get Austin in this fucking bitch. Stone Cold Steve Wade Picard. Talk with Austin Wade Picard. The Underclass Podcast. Already dead. Title it. I watched on Rumble once or twice. Yeah. Rumble would do way better if they just made their app, like their phone app. You got to make that shit compatible like YouTube. I was trying. I remember I was getting heavy into like conspiracy talk and shit like that, and I was like, oh shit, because like when I started No More Heroes, it was gonna be like straight conspiracy shit and like politics and stuff, and I was like worried it was gonna be like that's not gonna work out for this shit. So for YouTube and stuff, so I was heavy on putting that over in. I could rename the title over here pretty easily, actually. Okay, let's get this shit to Austin, and let's get to cooking. But yeah, so I was using Rumble a bunch for a little bit. I don't know if you guys were listening then, but like during the beginning of No More Heroes, I was heavy on Rumble with that, just because I was like, also too, the censorship on these topics and stuff was like more substantial. So it's like it was like justified, but wait, is my okay, cool. Yeah, guys, I'm doing it through Restream right now instead of the regular program I use. So here we go. Let's send that to Austin. Here we go. Just letting Austin know we're actually like live on stream. I think I tweeted everything. Damn. You know what it is? When I get a guest on here, it becomes much more. I become much more professional. You know what it is? I have low standards for myself, but when there's other people around, I got to show. I got to hop out and show, fellas, dude. So I sent Austin the fucking request. We'll wait for that. Moldy Toad, what's up? Thought you were wearing a Joffrey cap at first. What does that mean? Is that like are we talking like cancel? Did I invite him? Yeah, I sent him the right link. You know, it's funny. I'm using Restream. I'm using the Restream Studio, and I have never used this before. Actually, you know, I like an old guy hat. I love an old guy hat. I love an old guy hat. But wait, you're talking about is it a specific thing called a Joffrey cap or a Jeffrey? I'm thinking Joffrey cap. Are we thinking the same thing? Oh, one of those like shorter bike hats and shit. Oh yeah, those kind of fuck. I they don't seem overly practical in any way possible, but they look fucking cool. They look fucking cool as shit. Okay. Wait on that. Yeah, I like an old guy hat as well because they fit my head perfectly. They fit my head absolutely perfectly. Hey, there we go. Okay, here we go. Austin's hopping in. Let's let him in, dude. There we go. Hey, what up, brother?
Brother, man. Just, at this point, I'm really considering what everyone voted for.
Oh yeah,
this big, beautiful bill, Big Red.
So fucking there's one fat guy named Bill who had a good fucking tear when that shit was in the news. He's just like, yeah, I'll show you, big beautiful Bill, and everyone that works like, Bill, shut the fuck up.
Oh my god.
Hell yeah.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm trying to do more I want to do more interviews and shit because streaming's very lonely. And I was like, who's one of my favorite people to talk to? And I was like, oh, it's Austin Wade Picard. For when I repost this, or anyone who's watching live, Austin of the Underclass podcast, and also does a lot of stuff with Jose, Already Dead, all that shit, which Already Dead is one of my favorite names. It just sounds sick. But no, it's funny. I want to up top give you and Jose a compliment because I started to notice, like whenever there's like a news story, you always go like, all right, let me read the right wing and then the left wing and then what's the internet, and you realize you're like, oh, if I want to actually be up to date on a news story, you got to hit a couple different spots. And then I was starting to realize, I was like, wait a minute, I haven't gotten the schizophrenic perspective on this. So I love hopping over to you guys talking on Already Dead to sort of like, hit with the bigger picture and stuff. So that's why I'm very, very excited to talk to you today. But yeah, man, where you been at with everything right now? I don't know. There's so many things I want to start with. And like, I was listening to you guys on Clint's podcast with Sam Tripoli and stuff, and you were bringing up some wild shit I definitely want to talk to, but I think we should ease our way into it. Where are you with sort of what's going on in the news right now? I don't know, like what's the biggest thing popping out that's fucking your shit up?
Man, beyond the obvious like brewing international world conflict that very much seems to fall within the framework of the 7-country plan of Wesley Clark, Jr., obviously, who was warning us that Iran was was one of the final, priorities on the list. And so I feel like this has been in the cards for just generations, as far as potential regime change operations going on in terms of Iran and Khomeini, and I think that this has a lot to do with not just this sort of like globalist framework of controlling these natural assets on the geopolitical chessboard, and like you see like the Strait of Hormuz and how essentially was used as like a bargaining chip within like these bad faith negotiations conducted with Iran and the West, which clearly seemed doomed to fail from the beginning. And I think that was by design, right? And you look at what was involved with creating this new sort of like pretext of this WMD narrative that's taking hold in terms of like the enriching of the uranium to this like level to where they could allegedly manufacture up to 9 bombs. And in reality, it's like you look at this predictive AI software that was utilized to collect all of that data, that was claiming that these strategic military, enrichment sites, nuclear enrichment sites in Iran, were basically enriching at a at this weapons grade percentage. It was just like, honestly, it all came from Palantir's Mosaic program, which is hilarious that Peter Thiel's directly involved with kind of laying the groundwork for this conflict, because apparently the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, right, which are basically the weapons inspectors that go around to these nuclear facilities and conduct their investigations and see basically if they are, you know, meeting the standard of what, right, these like treaties and essentially like the if you remember the Iran nuclear deal that Obama signed, which he went around is like conducting interviews on Israeli media, basically saying that while he was put in, essentially backed into a corner, defending his position, saying that he had to placate the Saudis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, in terms of their strategic conflict with Yemen, so it's all of this is like, I think, another way to one. I didn't realize all of these strange like military you have all these crazy strategic military partnerships within the framework of Iran, Russia, and China. And I think that a lot of this, like again, is the reason why Israel and the US were strategically bombing, you know, and I mean, not just nuclear facilities, right? With the
Yeah.
bunker busters, they were strategically targeting, oil facilities, right? And so, and like as far as just like oil manufacturing facilities that were essentially a key prominent part to, at least they played a prominent role within the context of Iran's manufacturing capabilities, and then their ability to distribute this oil as well, which they just signed a fucking deal with China, which they apparently allows them to ship a lot of this oil and ramp up the distribution process. So all of this seems very coincidental, too much so for me to not be entirely skeptical, and so
Yeah.
I don't know, buddy. Like for me, I think an international world conflict is brewing by design. I think there's a reason that the conflict in Ukraine has not in any way kind of de-escalated, right? That was kind of what I was hoping for when Trump took office, was like, well, I actually expected a potential wind down in Ukraine, and we essentially got the exact opposite. And and what I was most concerned with was basically a conflict sparking up with Iran. And although I will say, I'm under no illusion that Kamala, like if Kamala were in office, we wouldn't be bombing Iran as
Yeah.
well. Because, dude, looking at a lot of the hawkish, political positioning during the campaign process. Let me find it real quick because I thought it was crazy. I actually looked at these headlines from during the Kamala's campaign, where they were kind of like positioning themselves to essentially give Israel a blank check in
Yeah.
terms of the Iranian escalation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, in no way do I think that this wasn't a preordained outcome, you know,
Hmm.
and here's a great example. Kamala Harris, this is Fox News, October 16th, 2024. Kamala Harris reveals why she believes Iran is America's biggest adversary, right?
Yeah.
Then we have
She was talking the same type of shit. I think if Kamala was in, they would just like you just wouldn't have Republicans just like as openly jerking off about it. But I think
right.
because like the culture sort of shifted where I don't think it's like everyone just turned Republican, but they're more like I hate that other bullshit they were all the woke bullshit they were doing. So everyone just went anti that as opposed to pro Republican. But I
Mhm.
even think if Kamala was in office, they'd still get the same shit done. It would just be it's like that great meme when the bombs have like the gay pride flags where they're like,
Yeah.
oh, thank God the bombs are open-minded. You're like, you're still
Yeah.
getting bombed. It's like, how do you want to get bombed?
They're all inclusive though, and they care
Yeah.
about your feelings while they're committing genocide.
Yeah,
It
yeah. Just so you know, they didn't say any bad words when they murdered your family at a wedding.
Right. Exactly, man.
But
And
yeah,
that's
no,
what
they've been it. Yeah, it feels like because that's the thing that's been like fucking me up lately. It's why I always joke like, or if I'll talk to people about your pod and I'll always joke. I go, I don't know how this dude still got his head on his shoulders because it's like the doom and gloom you pump yourself with is crazy because it's just like that feeling of dude, they're gonna get this shit done no matter who's there. It's just how it's gonna get done. But
Right.
like but I cut you off before. You're going on the tear about Iran and sort of like the
No, it's
mission in
cool.
general.
I just think that, you're right, they have to manage the reaction of the general public, and I think that's where you have the pendulum swing of the two-party delusion, right? Where the ideological subversion is intended to placate any sort of revolutionary class. That's just essentially
Mm.
what I believe,
Wait, say
you
that
know?
again. The ideological. Say that again. That was
I
poetry.
believe that the ideological subversion is intended to essentially placate
Yeah.
any real, potential revolutionary class, and that is, you know, in many ways, it's undermined any real threat that we could potentially even pose to the permanent establishment, and that's why I don't believe that. I think it would take a sort of and this is where it's like it becomes a slippery slope because you're not, I'm not quite certain what the solution is in this scenario, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's
yeah.
like, yeah, I don't have all the answers there. I'm just like more concerned with um really just manufacturing for myself a this sort of like fundamental defense mechanism that I can rely upon where I have these core values
Yeah.
very, very well established and in place to where I'm not I'm not falling for the smoke and mirrors and the political deception and the puppets that are very much performing in the theater that are clearly just attempting to, control the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
manage perception, right, at all times, and also manufacture consent. That's the name of the game, right? And
Yeah.
so, me
And
personally,
go on.
remain skeptical. Remain
Yeah.
skeptical at all times, you know?
Dude, and that's the thing that too, like, it reminds me of like my sort of mindset a lot of times with a lot of this quote unquote conspiracy stuff or however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
I come from a place of never wanting to believe this stuff ever. Like I miss college before I watched Zeitgeist. Dude, oh my god, the day I watched Zeitgeist, I didn't know. I was like, it's over. You're done.
Right, there's no turning
But
back.
I missed that fucking like, yeah, man, we're gonna figure it out, and everything's this and everything's that, and like there's order to the world and stuff. And it's like I wanna stay away. I want it to not be this so much, but the more you look into it, and like what you were saying with the manufactured consent, where it is like, that does seem like the broad theme of all these I don't know about how like a lot of stuff moves where it's like they need you to go along with it, but you need to be unbeknownst to yourself also like in this weird process of killing humanity. And it's like, so going back to what I said earlier, it leads me to be like, I don't want to believe in like Satanism and all that. But from what I've learned about that, I go, that sounds like that shit. Like everything I've ever heard is like they want to try to get you to do bad things, but they can't directly get you to do bad things. And then every time I see any of this stuff, I'm like, why does it always seem like we're just going to shit? Like there's never a moment where it's like we just hit the same thing over and over again. There's never a moment where people like, oh fuck, we should stop doing that one thing, the bad shit. But yeah, like I don't know. I haven't personally, I know you have with your podcast Underclass gone way more into the occult and stuff like that, but is that what you believe it is, where there's like a occult Satanist element run? Like what's the broad goal? Because that's the part I never get. It's like you see the weapons companies get all the money and then they keep getting more money and they keep blowing up people. And you're like, dude, but why? Like, it just seems to be like, we're still doing this, but I'm rambling. But like, what do you think is like the overall goal of this stuff?
I think that there is no doubt in a dystopian agenda that is what David Icke has always described as the totalitarian tiptoe, and I think that is, honestly, we're witnessing this play out, and we're seeing in real time the pivot toward the authoritarian technocratic state. And I think that's where you have all these like Peter Thiels and these various just leaders within the tech industry and AI, that are essentially surrounding Trump at this moment. And you have like it's very strange watching this sort of like fallout with Elon and Trump. It's interesting, right? Legitimately Trump's threatening to deport Elon.
Well, dude, that's what I realized with Trump, where I realized it with when he was like talking shit to Israel and he's like, they don't know what the fuck they're doing.
Right.
It hit me. I go, dude, Trump's down to do all the bad guy shit. Like he's down to be the supervillain in a fucking DC comic book. He's down to be that guy, but you can't talk to him like he's not in charge. Because the second you start, you have to let him feel like he did it and he was the big boy and he made all the big. Because that's the thing where I think you saw it with Elon. Like I heard the audio come out of Elon being like, Doge runs the government or whatever the fuck he said. And like and then you saw it with Netanyahu with the past couple things where it's like, oh, they get a little bit too big for their britches. And Trump has a moment where he's just like, yo, fuck you guys. You're not going to make me look like a fucking pussy in this situation.
Right.
Yeah.
It's definitely, I try to discern for myself what is political theater and what is natural reaction of a frustrated individual who's being kind of exploited from each and every side.
Yeah.
And like, you're clearly not altogether in charge of policy as the president of the United States. I mean, if Biden didn't prove that, then what exactly does? You know what I mean? As far as like, right? There's clearly there was a cabal.
Oh, dude, Biden. Sorry to cut you off, but Biden got to a point where you're like, all right, dude, the weekend at Bernie jokes are getting too real. Like,
legitimate. Dude, is he actually dead? Like that became a question.
Well, we've talked about it before where I remember like one or two interviews with you ago, I was sort of poking fun at the masks and stuff, and then you were like, no, dude, the CIA has actually said there's like they have crazy mask technology. And I swear to God, Biden was the first time I've ever looked at that goes like, look there, that's actually like it's a wrinkle in the outfit. And you're like, I mean, if they were gonna do it, it would have been with him, like 100%.
Right. Dude, by the way, Jonna Mendez is that woman that ran. She apparently was the CIA's former chief of disguise, and she was the one who, So
no, I'm laughing because I'm reading. I'm trying to finish up the what's it called, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate.
Okay.
It's a great book about MK Ultra and all that kind of stuff. And dude, it's like what did you say? She's like the head of costumes or whatever.
That's basically it. She's
some of the names of the organizations, the CIA, like are so funny. They're like head of all this like weird kooky bullshit. They just like they'll just throw out fucking names. It's
I know.
And it reminds me, it's what I realized when I got I was getting deep into the FBI and all the hijinks they do, and it really hits you where it's like everyone always thinks there's like some puppet masters. I'm a fair believer of there's intense intentions, but there's also a huge level of like people doing shit. Just doing shit. And with you talk about like they could just do whatever. They're like, all right, we want to see if remote viewing's real. Here, let's throw tens of millions of dollars at that. Let's see if we can make a look mask that look fucking perfect. And there's just like it's just so funny that it's like they have a theater department in the CIA where they're just working on outfits.
I'm telling you, man, it's so crazy to actually watch. And this woman, she, of course, her husband's a spook as well. That was involved with the Argo scandal, right? The Ben
Oh
Affleck
yeah.
movie, right? The hostage crisis that was basically a manufactured crisis. Obviously, it became the October surprise, right? And they even
Oh,
had like a task force involved. George Bush Senior. Dude, I found out there's a crazy ass connection to Waco there, which blew my mind,
so
right?
wait,
Because
we're talking about the hostage situation that like they stalled on with Carter, and then what was it? And then
yeah,
Reagan was like he let him
yep,
out at the beginning to look good or whatever.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one we're talking about, and that had that there's a correlation to Waco.
Oh yeah, 100%. And this all comes in the fashion of basically you have this guy named so essentially there's a spook who claims to have been the pilot who flew George Bush Senior and the rest of these like usual suspects from the old boys network
Okay.
into Paris during this time in order to negotiate the hostage deal. But in reality, it turns out so this guy's name, Paul Wilcher, is the actual individual who kind of exposed all of this. He claimed he had more knowledge than Danny Castellero, who and this is at the time that Danny Castellero gets suicided just before, obviously Danny Castellero on the octopus. If people are unaware of that connection, which is just
Yeah.
mind blowing, honestly. But
Yeah.
but this blew me away because it provides like a tangential connection, but it's not quite tangential because it clearly there's far more to this where you happen to have like a legitimate mind control possibility where you have MK Ultra involved with the Waco scandal, which that caught my eye instantly, and so I started, kind of, like, tugging at this thread a little bit, and it turns out that Paul Wilcher, he writes this letter to Attorney General Janet Reno at the time. It's called the Wilcher Report, and if you pull, honestly, let me pull up, because there was a flight log apparently of the where Rusbacher, I think, was the name
Yeah.
of the spook who actually claimed to be the pilot who flew George Bush Senior to Paris during the hostage crisis. But,
Mhm.
yeah, this is, like, legitimately, it's the Wiltshire Report is what it's called, and it's honestly, to me, I think that there is possibly a connection where you have far more involvement when you like just look at this strange connection with Bill Clinton's bodyguards, right? During the
Mhm.
92 election campaign. They're engaged in the Waco operation as officers of the ATF. And so out of the 4 BATF officers who were killed in the initial raid at Mount Carmel, on that day in February 28th, 3 of them happened to be the very same former Clinton bodyguards. So that potentially ties in the Clinton body count to, just,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it
poss
was. Uh,
possible.
yeah, it is interesting. There is, to just be devil's advocate, Texas is near Arkansas, so you could like
Right.
understand maybe they got transferred there. But you said it was like 3 of them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 3
Yeah,
out of the
that's
4 BATF agents, yeah.
and they were former Clinton bodyguards during the.
During the '92 campaign, which just occurred, so it was just, like, very strange as far as just
Yeah,
the connections involved, although I will say the Clintons were directly implicated in kind of calling the final solution in terms of what took place, the
at
fiery
Waco.
siege at the end of Waco. But, yeah, so
Oh
this
yeah, because
letter.
that was Janet Reno being like, "Is this cool to do, Bill?" And Bill was like, "Have fun."
Dude, Janet Reno, apparent she kind of was like I think she had some, like obviously, she knew where bodies were buried, because she was
Sure.
she was basically kind of like threatening as much in terms of like her reappointments, and saying that essentially if she wasn't reappointed, then she would blow the whistle on the true story of Waco. She even said that, which I thought was very interesting. But so the October surprise is this comes in the form of this guy that Paul Wiltshire cited in the name of Gunther Karl Russbacher, who he says he's a lifelong covert operative for the CIA and the Office of Naval Intelligence. So if you know how deeply involved the ONI has been in
Mm-hmm.
many of these domestic covert operations over the years, then it makes a lot of sense and just fits the playbook at the very least. And so he claims he was the pilot that flew George Bush and others to Paris for a meeting with Iran's leaders during the 1980 election campaign. Russbacher claimed to have flown Bush to France, apparently in a plane that was owned by the Saudi royal family.
Hmm.
And by Russbacher's recollection, the aircraft left from Andrews Air Force Base, and that was on October 18th, and then rendezvoused over the Atlantic with a Grumman Gulfstream flown by Heinrich Rupp and landed at Le Bourget Airport in Paris. So Russbacher returned Bush to the U.S. in a SR-71, which landed at McGuire Air Force Base at 10:50 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. After dropping Bush off at McGuire, Russbacher continued alone to Andrews. So this is who he says was on the flight log to Paris. William Casey, future CIA director.
Hmm.
Robert Gates, future CIA director. Earl Bryan, CIA agent, also credited by Wiltshire, was stealing the Inslaw Promise software, which directly ties him into the Danny Caslero's Octopus.
Yeah. And that was the software. What was that software again? I haven't looked.
It
I
was a
haven't.
case management software system, basically, and it
Yeah.
was yeah. You had so much.
Oh yeah,
Like,
wasn't it? It was like pre. It was like pre-modern internet and computer processing.
yeah,
So the software at the time was like crazy that it
state of the art.
existed.
Yeah, it would
Yeah,
allow for the authorities to essentially have this massive database
that's what it
collection,
was.
right?
Yeah.
But also what was the problem with the Promise software is that there was a strategic, covertly implemented and integrated backdoor that was only provided to the creator of the software, and essentially this was all done allegedly. Michael Riconosciuto claimed that they created this backdoor and compromised the Promise software on the Cabazon Indian Reservation, which
Mm.
was knowingly utilized in these covert operations domestically. They were even flying in Mexican nationals to cook methamphetamines on the fucking reservation. Yes,
Yeah.
seriously. That which is so crazy.
If
Uh,
if anyone isn't familiar with this, just go on Netflix and watch the Octopus Murders. I have to give it to Netflix. A lot of their documentaries are obnoxiously biased and pretty shitty. This one for the topic was shockingly good. So if you
Right.
guys are new to any of this, go watch that after the interview. But yeah, they were on what was it, the Cabasaw Indian Reservation, just doing anything because they had full range under like how the fucking reservation laws work and shit.
I'm telling you, like I found out, and this woman, Sherry Seymour, is considered by a lot of people to potentially be a spook.
Okay.
So it's definitely something that we have to take as far as we have to, at the very least, remain skeptical, not take it at face value as being an altogether genuine and legitimate. But I will say, this is a very, very interesting book. It was called The Last Circle, I believe, is the name of the book,
Yeah,
and I appreciated it.
yeah, right there.
Yeah,
Last circle.
yeah, and honestly, I think it's very important, especially if you consider just the Iran Contra. I just covered the Atlanta child murders. I had no idea there was an Iran Contra connection to that as well. So it just comes up so often,
Dude,
and
it's fucking nuts how often the shit pops up. The same book I was telling you about, Search for Manchurian Candidate. It's like, and this was a book written like way before chaos or any of that shit. But yeah, in the middle of it, they randomly mentioned like the Haight Ashbury Free Clinic or
yeah,
where like man, and I go, what the fuck is this, man?
I know, man.
But I'm sorry,
It's
the Iran Contra, I believe you said.
Yeah, no, this is just like you have a whack and hunt breakdown essentially that was given by Sherry Seymour. Now, Wackenhut, I think, was very much used as essentially this covert clandestine cutout for the CIA, and it
Mhm.
was basically this security corporation, really, the Whack and Hunt Security, that
Mhm.
were essentially developing esoteric weapons, is what they were described as, like the rail gun, which even included biological warfare. And they were doing this advanced weapons testing as a joint venture between the Cabazon Indian Reservation. Right. So Wagon Hunt Security was just running CIA covert weapons testing domestically, utilizing a Indian reservation for plausible deniability. And
Yeah.
so they're like apparently many of the Indians that were still on the reservation were like essentially utilized as slave labor at a
Mm.
certain point. It's a
Mm.
fascinating story, and there were all these investigations that were conducted. Apparently, there was even like a group that came together, and basically there were I believe it was a group called, Decency in Government Incorporated, and it's all these sheriff deputies and grand jurors who formed this organization and then filed a lawsuit against the Attorney General of California, as well as the governor and the director of the FBI, for what they called dereliction of duty.
Mm.
And they claimed they knowingly allowed and facilitated drug trafficking and smuggling operations in the area, specifically in Central California. And so many of those Native Americans claimed that they had been forced to participate in some of those criminal actions by local sheriff's deputies, essentially exploiting them as slave labor to produce certain drugs. So that's just like, this is where you have like why I think there's so much police involvement with local authorities and narcotics officers being compromised. That happened in the Fort Bragg murders with Jeffrey McDonald. It was like 6 months after the Manson murders, and
Mm.
I had
You
no
did
idea.
you did an episode on that a couple months ago, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and it blew me away because original reports were like, did a satanic cult come in and ritualistically murder this guy's family and try and kill him basically, and puncture his lung to a point to where he lost like a crazy. I think his lung collapsed. Like the vast majority of one of his lungs just fully collapsed, and he was like stabbed with an ice pick and bludgeoned. And there were at least 4 people involved. I think up to 7 potentially. But
Mhm.
but yeah, it's fascinating because there's a criminal informant by the name of Helena Stokely that really it becomes the smoking gun, because her and Prince Beasley, who's a local Fayetteville, North Carolina narcotics officer, was essentially her handler, and uh, and she became involved with an outfit that was like a local satanic offshoot of the Process Church of the Final Judgment, and they were legitimately performing what looked to be a fertility death ritual that night, and that was came in the form of essentially her initiation to the inner circle of the cult, which were basically involved in facilitating the domestic drug trafficking operation out of Fort Bragg at the time, which was directly connected in with what was called the cadaver connection. Ties in essentially all these Vietnam. You had all these dead bodies, right, of American GIs coming home from Vietnam, and they were lining their caskets and then also stuffing bags of heroin into their fucking bodies, dude. Like legitimately, they were not only were they in the actual coffins themselves and given a specific tag to where the individuals facilitating the drug trafficking operation would be able to distinguish which coffin held the vital substance, you know what I mean, that they were potentially using to which wasn't only heroin. There were a multitude of other drugs that they were obviously utilizing within the framework, but still, the fact of the matter is, like, you had individuals who went down for years, that were directly connected in bringing this not only from Vietnam but directly out of Thailand as well into the U.S. And it wasn't just Fort Bragg; it was all up and down the west or the East Coast, and they were domestically facilitating that through the US through these various hubs of operation.
Mm.
For example, Atlanta being one of them. Where you had like, yeah, you had like a cab driver from Miami who was a Vietnam veteran who legitimately was, so he was recruited into this organization. He started trafficking drugs through this cab company where they would essentially they would procure used vehicles, used cars, and they would line them with drugs, and then they would traffic the drugs in the used cars by driving them from Miami to Atlanta and to Houston as well, which was
Oh
another
yeah.
hub of the
And
operation.
Atlanta, for people who don't know, is like a huge drug hub because it has it's like 10 different highways intersect through it. So it's a
The
bit, dude.
CDC's there.
Dude, dude, it's so funny when you just have connecting highways. Like my wife used to live in this place called East Stroudsburg, which is on the way to the Poconos in Pennsylvania. It's like a small town, but they would constantly have a drug problem because excuse me, PA, New Jersey, and New York would intersect there. So people would just pop off, and it'd be a great place to get drugs. So if you just, it's so funny if you just have highways meeting, you might live in a more dangerous area. So wait, so they're delivering a lot of drugs from, you said, like Florida to or
Oh, man.
Miami to Atlanta and all this other shit.
Yep.
And wait, where were you going with that? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good, dude. I think, like, once you start to realize that there's this woman who fits the exact same, so you could legitimately draw a direct parallel between Shirley McGill, the criminal informant in the Atlanta child murders case, to Helena Stokely, the criminal informant in the Fort Bragg murders
Or
case,
brag, okay.
right? I swear to God, it's like uncanny how relatable their stories are.
And
It seems identical.
who are each of these women again?
So you have Shirley McGill, who she's a Miami informant who provides a satanic cult connection to the Atlanta child murders, right?
Gotcha.
And this comes in the form of what is a drug trafficking operation, as I mentioned, that spans the coast from Miami to, Atlanta is where they're trafficking specifically within the framework of this operation from Miami to Atlanta to Houston. And I think this is important as well as far as like the organized crime aspect of it all, because I think they hold hands directly in terms of facilitating these domestic intelligence operations.
Yeah.
I honestly believe that, the U.S. government is just the largest, organized crime syndicate out there.
Strong
Essentially,
argument there.
yeah, 100%. And as Dave Smith has always described it, it's just, they're dressing up and parading around as a human rights organization.
Yeah, the
It's just,
mafia as a human rights
yeah,
organization.
that's
Yeah.
what it truly is, honestly, at a certain point. But yes, so this enterprise was not only moving drugs, but according to her, and this comes in the form of her boyfriend Parnell Traham, right? And he's the cab driver who I mentioned from Miami, who's helping, line these used cars with drugs and drive them into Atlanta. And so Parnell Traham, it turns out, he begins abducting children to use in the production of child pornography and snuff films is
Oh,
essentially what begins to take place. And so you have like Michael Thievis is a well-known child pornography kingpin in Atlanta at the time, whose connections, consist of Larry Flint, that of Larry Flint, producer of, founder of Hustler magazine,
I
and
don't like that. I just watched a video on how cool Larry Flint was.
he's a huge piece of shit, dude. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he was. There's a reason he was like, shot and put into a wheelchair while he was in Atlanta. Like, oh
Wait,
yeah, dude.
really?
Oh yeah,
Come on,
yeah.
man.
It's so crazy. And the Cotton Club murders
That's
are
why I
all
like
direct.
talking to you. You always say shit where I go, "Come on, man."
It's fascinating, man. Like
You said
I didn't.
cotton?
Yeah, the
No, go
Cotton
ahead. I'm
Club
sorry.
murders. No, you're good, buddy. It's called the Cotton Club murders, and essentially Roy Radin was among the individuals who were a part of the Cotton Club murders, because the Cotton Club, basically, it was a movie that was being produced at the time, and essentially Roy Radin was a film producer who was also directly involved in the human compromise operation. Had a mansion in upstate New York where he would have these sort of like human compromise parties that sort of remind me of the pink ballets in the Dutroux case, which are procuring young children to sexually blackmail,
Mm.
very wealthy individuals and prominent individuals who would be invited to these parties. And, like, always keep in mind the elevator trick from the Concora scandal, where it's like not every individual who's compromised by these operations
Yeah.
actually sadistically violated a child. You know what I mean? It's like,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
I think there's a fucking huge amount of people who get blackmailed who they just like to party, they like to get fucked up, and they stayed till 1 or 2 a.m. and
yep.
you know, they looked way more mature than they like you trusted the party host that they had of age prostitutes and oh you got tricked now fucking send this money to Israel, pussy. You know what I mean?
Basically, dude. And
Yeah,
and
no,
that's
I think that's like I think there's definitely and it's like I love how Sam Tripoli talks about it. He calls it the predator class. I
yeah.
think there's a strong but still like this might be wishful thinking, but a small but strong chunk that is the predator class, and they
Right.
take advantage of people with sort of like loose morals that just want to have a good time and they're just not bad people but easily people who are easy to take advantage of. And yeah, they just get caught up in some bullshit. And people don't like being known as pedophiles. So that's why they just, sign bills that help everyone die.
I know it's like I use the example of Dennis Hastert so often because he was the longest tenured Speaker of the House, a Republican, and he legitimately was a pedophile who was criminally charged, and
Yeah.
and the sister of one of the boys he sadistically abused, who later committed suicide, like due to his the demons in that closet, it's the skeletons in that closet, like, at least that's what the implication is, like, he was
Yeah.
directly confronted by his abuser, by the, victim's sister, right?
Hmm.
And it's such a tragic story. I told it, I think it was in maybe the Franklin scandal, one of the either that or the Finders, I can't remember anymore. I've covered too much of these networks, man, like, it's starting to just kind of blend together at a certain point.
Brother, it's fucked up. I wanted to dip my toe into doing like, oh, let me outline a book and I'll do like a scripted thing and like podcast. I was like, I want to try that. And I was like, I've been obsessed with Program to Kill. And I think I got through 6 pages of outlining that book. And I go, maybe I pick a different book. This is
Yeah.
sad.
For
It's
real.
fucking a lot. You got to like, it's so funny. It's like why I joke. It's why I go, dude, some of the shit I'm into, it makes 9/11 one of the fun ones to get into. Like it's
Honestly.
how dark some of this shit gets.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's
Mhm.
why, like, you know, it's I just think it's very important to understand that these a lot of these networks that involve this sadistic pedophile underground, like, they do blend together for a reason, and
Mm.
and I didn't understand this until recently. Like, if you read The Eye of the Chicken Hawk,
Which unfortunately I am.
my God, like, things
Dude,
begin to make
chapter 1's called Snuff Films. It's a crazy book, dude. The first chapter, they're like, all right, so snuff films are real, and you're like, that's chapter 1? What the fuck is in chapter 10?
Right. That's what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
and, and that is why recently I've been very much, like, focusing and prioritizing on, this unfortunate connection to the snuff film enterprise, because it does, the criminal enterprise is never just focusing and prioritizing one aspect of,
Mhm.
right. It's legitimately, it all blends together. And the targeted assassinations, I believe serial killers are a manifestation of a cover up in more ways than one. I mean, even Wayne Williams is a great example. Atlanta child murders. I don't even think he killed any of those children. Honestly,
Oh, really?
I think he procured quite a few of them, and was definitely involved. His father was implicated in the network, but he was considered, like, that guy was legitimately prioritized as a patsy and that happened whenever George Bush Sr. Essentially held a meeting at the Atlanta governor's mansion and said, if you need, the feds will become far more involved if you can't put a close to this case, right? And
Hmm.
bring closure to this case. And essentially, the patsy was chosen directly after that. And you had individual congressmen legitimately go and meet, state representatives go and meet with Homer and Wayne Williams at their home and bribe them, attempt to bribe them to essentially go along with the conviction. And his defense team was entirely infiltrated. Legitimately, his one of his original attorneys was the attorney for Michael Thevis, who was that well-known child pornography kingpin that I mentioned before. That, guess what, was running Apogee Records in the music studio in Atlanta, where Wayne Williams was procuring the young children in his what I forgot what the name of his group was called.
Yeah.
The Gemini Group, I believe, was the name of the group that he was
Oh,
that
okay.
yeah, and essentially it was a talent recruitment organization where he's recruiting young children that he claims share all these characteristics and have all of these traits where they should be put on the path to stardom with their musical talents. And so he's procuring young children, going around recruiting them, claiming to their parents that he's going to place them, on this path to stardom. And then he's taking them to the local Apogee Records recording studio where they're filming child pornography. And many of these children were essentially involved in child prostitution as well, which is, I think, very important because, if you look at, the level, I would say, you know, just the class of individual who is being targeted, it's very unfortunate. It's look, man, I'm talking like essentially it's hard to even understand them, and English is their first language. I'm attempting to not be insulting, but it's just like it seemed as if this was the lowest level of class that you could
Oh,
potentially prioritize in abducting and abusing,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
and so it very much led to a lack of concern in their well-being, but also the level of numbers as the kids started just showing up. Like, but it wasn't just children. And by the way, Wayne Williams was only charged with two adults, essentially, and with killing two adults, and he's considered the Atlanta child murderer of over 30 children, or up to
Hmm.
28. And it's just laughable because there's no actual evidence that proves that. You know,
And also too, like that was a thing I remember reading a bunch in Program to Kill. That was like a really interesting thing to point out, where it's like the numbers they put up are
yeah,
like unreal, and then they always just go, "Oh yeah, it was like that one dude. That one dude just racked up like,
right.
what'd you say, like 38,
They said
38
like
kills?"
basically 28 to 30 children.
Yeah.
They
Oh, okay.
tried to, essentially claim he was the sole perpetrator, but there were at least an additional 30. Potentially, there were 60 plus children that
Yeah.
were a part of this list. Chet Detlinger was an investigator who was very much involved, and also uh, a local a police investigator as well, who was very much involved with Chet Detlinger, Jeffrey Pugh, or something to that effect, who wrote a book called The List, and they talk about how the task force left off, a significant number of child victims that should have been on that list because they fit the legitimate profile of being involved and tied back to what seemed to be these couple of houses that were involved in this child prostitution.
Yeah.
And that was like, you had pedophiles like Earl Terrell or I mean, Tom Terrell and John David Wilcoxon, who are very much involved in this network of abuse as well. But what I found was interesting is that you had like at the end of that chapter on Atlanta in Program to Kill,
Mm.
McGowan brings up how the CDC was potentially, first of all, how the CDC is its hub is in Atlanta,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how in 1979, well, in 1977 to 79 to 81, I believe, So 79 to 81 is when they claim, was the 2-year span of killings, right, that they attribute to Wayne Williams in this case. But it was during this time when essentially HIV is hitting the scene. And it's
Yeah.
very interesting because they claim that there was a potential reality that some of these child victims were deliberately, were essentially deliberately dosed with HIV, right? With and then traced and tracked to see how this would sexually contract and spread, right? And so it was very interesting to actually to read about how potentially this was even a covert operation utilizing a covert domestic medical facility that was ran by the CIA that has ties to David Ferry. If you read about Dr. Mary's monkeys, right, and how they allegedly broke out, that were these monkeys used in these experiments
Oh yeah,
with what
28
was
days
developed
later.
right, right. Exactly, exactly. But it wasn't that they, oh my god, they accidentally
But
broke
it
out
was
of this.
AIDS and not a rage
Yeah,
virus.
right, exactly. But it was
Sorry.
essentially described as they had, accidentally broken out of this laboratory, this covert weapons laboratory,
Yeah.
and in reality, I think it was a controlled release. But that definitely caught my eye because there's always layered operations being conducted, and if you understand like the Cobra Academy and Mitch Warbell
Yeah.
and how deeply tied in he was, and Wayne Williams claiming at 17 years old he's recruited by the CIA and trained at this basically it's a black site, a CIA black site in the domestic US outside of Atlanta, where
Mhm.
Mitch Warbell was apparently, running the Cobra Academy, and he's later, security apparently, he's providing security advice to Larry Flint,
Mm.
and he gets poisoned at Larry Flint's mansion, winds up dead in the hospital, like, within a week. It's time, I think it was even a couple of days, and
That's
it turns
crazy.
out that someone, I believe it was William Mincer, the same hitman who allegedly, murdered, Roy Radin in the Cotton Club murders, was potentially behind the poisoning of, Mitch Warbell, and this was all so they could pass off his covert CIA training academy, to another spook within the operation that they could trust more apparently with the future it's very interesting when you get into the details of all of that.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you right now, nothing is at as it seems, my brother. You know what I mean? Like, that is for
Well,
damn sure.
Well, I was thinking about that, actually listening to you and Jose talk about, I already knew about it, but you guys were just you were going on about, Operation Gladio. Oh yeah, that's right. I was listening to you guys on Jake Shields, and I don't know what you guys got into that day, but it was so like you guys were having a 3-on-3 schizo off of just like who could talk the fastest. It was like I was like, oh, the boys are cooking over there. Let's go.
Dude, I
It
was
was
so excited.
Yeah, it was how cool was that, by the way? I saw seeing you guys fucking do the live shows with Jake and Sam and shit like that. How fucking fun is that?
Man, I will say it feels surreal, honestly, because like Jake's like the coolest, most down to earth guy as well, which is it just made it so easy to have a conversation and so that's just a blessing. But Sam, man, like Sam has I've described myself as just we're all disciples of Sam Tripoli at this moment, right? Like legitimately it feels that way to a certain point because of how much he's he just played a pivotal role for me personally, opening a lot of doors, right? Giving me an opportunity and yeah, having a show with him too. Just it's paywalled on Patreon. We call it Whatever This Is, and me, him, and Brad
Oh,
Binkley do it.
I was looking for
The
that the other
propaganda
I was
report.
looking for that the other day. I couldn't find it. So it's on Patreon. Okay.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
on your Patreon?
yep,
All right.
yeah. All three of us have it as our paywall content, so at
Gotcha.
least a part of it. So, but yeah, it's been it's just been a blessing, man. Honestly, it has been, and going to do Jake Shields was just like, as far as the Fight Back podcast, like his genuine interest in just you know legitimately his concern as well about just the most vulnerable among us. He was legitimately emotionally, how could you not be, moved emotionally, understanding that this is all unfortunately a reality that we face, that there is this sinister pedophile underground that's so much more well established to where I believe you have, I mean, if you consider what I mean, you just like I always use the Finders as one of the best examples, right? Because it's just fucking crazy that I
Oh yeah.
I mean,
I threw them out the other day because I talked to my wife about a lot of this stuff because she's really into true crime and serial killers. And
mhm.
anything she brings up, I just go, my friend Austin said that was the CIA actually. And
Yeah,
and so
honestly.
and sometimes she gives me pushback but I was like hitting her with I was telling her about the Finders cult and she's like, well, that is real. So I gotta give you that one. But yeah, no, there's
Man,
like that's the thing. People think because like QAnon, one of the most obvious ops in my opinion. I think they use that to basically associate anyone who cares about pedophilia or whatever as a kook,
oh,
which
yeah.
is that's what I noticed. By the way, I started noticing that shit when they were first trying to smear Alex Jones, which he's been kind of sus lately, but we'll talk about that another time. But like when they were first trying to smear Alex Jones, it was like I was like, he talks about like pedophiles all the time. It seems to be like you keep associating the bad people with who are ever against pedophiles and shit like that. And but yeah, man, it's like the shit is there. They've proven it with the Finders cult, all that kind of shit. And it's
The
just like
Franklin scandal as well, right?
Franklin scandal,
Yeah.
which I'm in the middle of listening to that audiobook again, kind of. I got
Mhm.
sad and moved on to something else, so I'm
Right,
trying it
hey.
again.
You have to, like, I personally, after this last episode on Atlanta, and I know I went a little schizo on it, and I didn't provide all the most extraordinary, crucial details to, like, set up some of the smoking guns that are more interesting, but
Yeah.
I think it is more important. So definitely, I do urge everyone to go check out the episode because I think it's vital and important in terms of understanding that this does overlap in terms of John David Norman ran
Hmm.
this what's called the Odyssey Foundation, which was later rebranded as the Delta Project. But keep that name in mind, man, because honestly, there's Simon Dovey, who wrote The Eye of the Chicken Hawk, he
Hmm.
has a wonderful website called The Hot Star, and it's devoted to a lot of these, primary resource materials and essentially in a very a comprehensive way. He's provided a lot of these more what I believe to be the most crucial aspects of these cases, and it's just by the way, there's even on that website, there's even an article connecting the Finders directly to the Odyssey Foundation, claiming that members of the Finders and also members of NAMBLA were purchasing children who were abducted within the Odyssey Foundation, ran by John David Norman. John David Norman, now held a major footprint in Dallas. I believe he was connected directly into the Dean Coral child murders as well, the Candyman killings, the Candyman murders. Dean Coral allegedly murdered 20 plus children as well, which, he was abducting those children. They were being utilized in child pornography and snuff films as well. So, they found he has direct connections, archived child pornography within the context of John David Norman's network, right, with the Odyssey Foundation. And it turns out John David Norman had rented an apartment to Jack Ruby while he was in Dallas.
That's fun.
I'm not even playing, and that connects in the Chicago mob to the Dallas mob in my mind,
That's
and
fun stuff.
it's very important to understand that because John Wayne Gacy, right,
Yeah.
affiliated with the Chicago mob, was directly involved with John David Norman's Odyssey Foundation while John David Norman's in prison.
Yeah.
Okay, he tasked Phil Paskey with running what he rebranded the Odyssey Foundation, which was just a child procurement operation that was essentially an enterprise that involved, promoting the sadistic. So they had a pedophile, publication that was essentially promoting. Basically, it was a subscription based model where, based on your sexual sadistic proclivity, you could even you could even subscribe to the level to where you could be brought out to North Fox Island and be involved in human hunting parties. This is legitimately real. Ties
What
directly in
and
it that
what is this whole thing called?
so
Or
this
I
is
guess
called
what would you search to look this up? Because this
the
sounds nuts.
Odyssey Foundation and the Delta Project. I think those,
Gotcha,
because it's the same thing. It's one and the same. It was just a rebrand that was conducted after John David Norman went to prison, known pedophile.
gotcha. Okay,
Yeah, you look up John David Norman. It's the Jimmy Savile effect all day long. That fucking guy did it. You know what I mean? You just got to
Jimmy
look at him.
Jimmy Savile.
I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
they're like, can you believe this guy touched kids? You're like, I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
why. He should the second he someone saw his face, you should have just arrested him. It's like, brother, you did something.
No doubt. But always justified as just like a unique, eccentric, and it's just like laughable. But they're sitting there
Yeah,
joking and on live, talk shows about essentially hiding a. Remember, Jimmy Savile was talking about how he hid a child in the boot of his car and drove it into the Buckingham Palace and like
yeah,
delivered this child, and just tells this story on a live talk show. As
yeah,
if
and
nothing happened.
that's why it's always like so important to. It's like before Peterson went crazy and whatever, which he did a lot of good work.
Crying.
So all oh yeah, wasn't he like crying like crazy yesterday on Piers Morgan or something? I saw a screenshot and I
Again?
go, that's not real. He can't still be crying
You
on
can't
fucking
keep
TV.
doing this.
But no, I always show respect to pre-Benzo's Peterson because he put out a bunch of good shit. But that was always like his thing about people always thought he was like people always thought he was transphobic, which God forbid. And but he was like, dude, honestly, it's more so like, yo, live your life, have fun, but like you can't force me to say a thing that I know is to be a lie, like legally speaking, because that is the first pebble or on the road to totalitarianism and yada yada yada. And it's one of the things where like that's the thing. It's like, there's constantly these things where people are just trying to get an inch, and over time it turns into a fucking mile. So it's like when you see those things, people always try to, like you were saying, like, oh, this guy has a story with a boot in his car, and people go like, whatever, man. That's like, people were different back in there. I go, no. We should really talk about this.
Yeah.
It's not like a thing of, dude, it's like one thing if you see like an old clip and sort of they're talking about a different race and it's just not on par with today's standards. That's one thing. It's another thing to be like, nah, any time period, that's a really bad thing to fucking do.
Yeah.
So yeah, but like you see that everywhere. I feel like at least you see that everywhere where they're just trying to like take an inch. They're trying to do the boiling frog thing, they call it. And it's just, it's unfortunate because that was my big realization learning about the world, where I do everything I do in my life is to feel like I've done enough and I get to like fucking chill. Like, cause that's my favorite thing. I just want to have a beer, smoke a cigarette, maybe play some pool, hang out. And you think you can just fucking chill, but it's like, no, it's like you have to earn it. And it's like all these areas in our life where we just let this shit go because they're like, what's the big deal? It's like, nah, there's certain things that you're like, you don't get an inch on that one. And it's important to, because I think at the end of the day, it's like the people are the ones who are going to change the thing, because they're going to change how shit goes, because like you were saying before, it's all around manufactured consent. So it's like they can't get the shit done unless people sort of go along with it. And I know it seems like a tall order, but I swear to God, if everyone just had a little bit more of a backbone, we'd be 1,000% better with everything. You see creepy stuff like that on TV. Jimmy Savile, kids in the trunk. It's fucking crazy.
But the fact that he wasn't exposed until after his death, and then he's like buried like a fucking vampire as well. Like they put him at like some crazy angle, and essentially it was a ritualistic burial. Like he was he believed he was like an occult esoteric wizard. Like
Mm.
honestly, he believed he was casting a spell with the cigar that and like honestly, this is crazy shit, but he legitimately I think he practiced necrophilia as well. We know he like was fucking dead bodies and had even spent time alone with his own mother's corpse, which is very strange, and a lot of people have said something potentially happened there because he was the seventh son of uh uh it's like this crazy everything that happened with Savile. I'm going to have to do an entire episode on him specifically because when I covered the Anglo-Irish vice ring in the Concora scandal and Lord Mountbatten and these insane connections to the fact that these are very well known sadistic pedophiles that were looting child care organizations to then obtain untraceable children and at times never even bring them back, right? Because they were running roughshod over orphanages and these strange like he had so much money he had donated to these child hospitals and so there were like young what do they call the all female orphanage um either way, but still, he would there was a specific one, he would tour these young child care organizations, and he would just, like, legitimately park a van outside in the parking lot, and at night, depending on apparently who was on staff, he knew who was compromised, who, essentially wouldn't ask any questions, and all the children later described his scent. They knew his keys jingling and the smell of his cigar because he would just come sadistically rape them at night. And and he had a free range access to this facility, these facilities, and he would brutally, sexually abuse children in broad daylight, just corner them in a room and shove his hand down their pants. Like that's the type of person that he was, always attempting to see what more he could get away with, and yet
Mm.
he has free range to Buckingham Palace and can come and go as he pleases with no security, questioning him whatsoever. And he's knighted by the Queen and you know, top of the pops, right? I mean, that's where he came from.
Yeah.
This jockey, but far more than that. I mean, that's where he got his name. But he spent his life around children. Right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's the same as Larry King in the Franklin scandal. Nick Bryant still following that piece of shit around, who's trying to infiltrate these child care organizations, a part of like the Washington Redskins, the ownership committee at one point, and Nick Bryant's, talking to them about how he's attempting to procure children under these various positions, right, and get himself around these children, and so it's just again, when you look at these various cases and you see this consistent overlap, you have members of the Finders ordering children from John David Norman's Odyssey Foundation. John David Norman's in prison, tells Phil Paskey, tasks him with running the Odyssey Foundation while he's in prison. They just decided to call it the Delta Project instead. And the Hermes, I believe it was the Hermes publication, is the name of the child pornography publication that was used to promote this sinister enterprise.
Yeah.
And who's Phil Paskey working for on the outside while he's running the Delta Project or the Odyssey Foundation for John David Norman while he's imprisoned? Oh, he just happens to be on the construction crew ran by John Wayne Gacy, dude.
Ha! Damn.
Who abducted and killed how many boys?
Yeah, put a bunch of them under his house and shit.
Hey, man.
That's crazy.
He's burying bodies for the Enterprise. That's what he was doing. They say that he potentially, Paul Bonacci, in the Finders case, in the Franklin scandal, legitimately claims that he believes that it was John Wayne Gacy, one of the two abductors who abducted Johnny Gosch, right?
Yeah.
The famous paperboy abduction that was the first big on the milk carton case, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, man, who was abducted, and the Johnny Gosch abduction is one of the most, just it's a fascinating story, right? That comes up in the Franklin case, and if you listen to Noreen Gosch, I think Johnny Gosch's parents were involved. I think his father was definitely involved. He takes Johnny to Offutt Air Force Base at one point before his disappearance,
Hmm.
And that's a key. That's like the hub, the ground zero of MK Ultra in many ways, as far as what they were doing with Offwood Air Force bases, where Michael Aquino, right, was meeting with Larry King from the Franklin scandal, where
Oh
they claimed
yeah.
that they're apparently, I believe it was a transaction that took place, and essentially they were witness. There's Paul Benassi himself claims that there was a transaction, right? And there was apparently some sort of money that exchanged, hands. But
Hmm.
still, it's like, to me, I believe that was one of uh, the hubs of essentially where the child abductions were being facilitated through, because they were flying these kids in private planes all over the country. I mean,
Yeah.
they were picking up. You picked up Paul Benassi, then they would go and abduct a couple of children, pick up the actual film director and producer of the films that they were about to, actually record, and then they would go to their destination after flying from Ohio to Vegas to Northern California. And then Paul Bonacci himself claims that he talked to some of these children who were abducted in this context on these private planes, and that you know he's he told Ted Gunderson that, obviously, in one case, the child had never been in any sort of sexual position, obviously, and so he's essentially kind of like laying the groundwork during the flight for what the child is going to expect, and then is basically tasked with committing some of the sadistic abuse in the snuff film that would
Mm.
essentially play out, and then that is how the enterprise was conducted. So that alone is like, when you listen to what Ted Gunderson says, people say what they want about him. I have no reason to question in most of I mean, honestly, unless anyone has no one has provided me with any reason to question the details of the cases that he's been involved with, that I've come across, in terms of Fort Bragg murders, Franklin scandal,
Yeah.
even the McMartin case. I mean, that it was proven that there were tunnels under that school. I mean, it wasn't just McMartin.
Yeah.
It was many other preschools and child care organizations in the area of Manhattan Beach, and Paul Bynum, one of the investigators that was a police officer in Manhattan Beach. That dude was murdered because he had legitimate knowledge and was unwilling to effectively compromise his integrity, and wanted to pursue legitimate, charges, and blow the whistle against what was a true network of child abuse that was, all being facilitated through the child care organizations in Manhattan Beach at the time.
Yeah.
And so what does Ted Gunderson say about the finders? He says they were established in basically the 1960s, but it was essentially David Marion Petty was kind of doing his thing in the mid 50s, I think, orchestrating a lot of this before it began. But he says, Ted Gunderson, that the members of the finders were specially trained government kidnappers with top clearance and protection in their assigned task of stealing children, torturing and sexually abusing them, sometimes involving them in satanic orgies, bloody rituals, and murder of other children with the slaughter of animals. It's exactly what happened when Ramon J. Martinez, U.S. Customs agent, goes into the W Street apartments of the Finders case, and they perform that raid on those properties. And what do they find? Oh, the butcher and execution ritual murder of Henrietta and Igor, the goats, where you have children. The members of the Finders said it was uh, it was a it was training in animal husbandry, and in reality, they had robes. They were committing a ritualistic animal sacrifice, having the children cut out cut open a live goat's womb and pull out the baby, dead babies, right? Yeah, like, legitimately. It's so
Yeah.
crazy. What and behead one of the goats, and uh and yeah, it seems like with the Johnny Gosh case specifically, they utilized this fleet of unmarked cars to grab the targeted child, because there was a paperboy fetish that was ordered at the time by this specific individual. They claim Michael Aquino was the one who put in the order, but that order went through him, and it was another individual who actually requested this, and it was his sinister, sort of sexual proclivity that was being achieved or pursued in the paperboy fetish scandal, because it wasn't just Johnny Gosh. There was a range of there were multiple cases. Noreen Gosh, Johnny's mom, said, hey, by the way, there's going to be another paperboy who's abducted in this exact area at this exact time, and it fucking happens.
That's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah. God damn. That's why I like listening to you, because most of that, most of what you just said, I think I've heard some of the names. I've heard half. Like, no one else is talking about this shit. I've heard about maybe half of that stuff, and it's all very interesting. And and the funny part too is, and I'm gonna tie in this with a comment where Moldy Toad asks, what's this guy's pod? I like his jib. Well, if you're a big fan of Austin's jib, just reminding everyone in stream, it's called the Underclass Pod. And then he works with Jose Galasan of the No Way Jose podcast, and they do Already Dead together. And then you said you got the one with Sam on your Patreon and a whole bunch of stuff. Austin's everywhere. Go check it the fuck out. But wait, sorry, what was the fuck? Dude, I had this. This might be rewinding a little bit, because I did want to ask you, when you hear about all these things, like it's one thing to have certain sexual proclivities, to be deviant, yada yada. It's another thing to be like, oh, we're gonna make kids cut open goats and stuff like that. Yeah. And one of the big I'm curious about your perspective on this. One of the big things I always hear people say is they'll be like, yeah, man, I think a lot of those rich people, you just fuck everything, and at a certain point you want to get more deviant. I go, I don't know, man. Like, I've never been a rich senator, but I can't imagine there'd be a time where I'd be like, enough pussy, bring me a boy. You know what I mean? No. It all just seems so wacky to me.
Yeah. No, I honestly think there's something to do with sociopathic nature of robbing the innocence of a child.
Something to do. It makes sense, because like I was gonna make a joke about it, but like the whole time you're talking, it's like, because there's one, like I have friends who want to do. I have a lot of friends who want to do deviant shit, but because of their current state in life, they like either don't do it, or they scale it, or they're just like, oh yeah, it would be great to do A, B, and C, but I'm an adult and I can't do that many drugs and survive, and I can't, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. There's all these like different crazy things you want to do, but it's the like determination. Like you're just like, you're describing some of the hardest working people ever. It's like, because they're so fucking, it feels like they're like these psychopaths who are so locked into that behavior and their whatever mission they think they have, that I just go, it's the part that always fucks me up is the like the resilience of it. I don't know if that's the right word, but the persistence. Like it would get to a point where it's like, oh, you guys are all in on this to a scary level. That's the part that fucks me up.
So I came across a potential motive for some of the more sinister occult organizations that prioritize the child sacrifice, because that is what, like the Hand of Death cult, they were sacrificing adults as well. They really were practicing just blood sacrifice, animal sacrifice, but when you are a sadistic sociopath in the way in which you are attracted to, because there definitely are minor attracted persons, as they call them, right? Which are just sadistic pedophiles that 100%, I think it's the power positioning within the sexual framework as well. But also, what people don't understand is the enterprise that incorporates dissociative identity disorder and these very sophisticated methods of mind control that have been very well established and developed over time and generations of experimentation and exposing children and especially before puberty, prepubescent apparently is apparent is a this is what is within this context. This came up in the Kincora scandal that I mentioned earlier, because this informant, she approached, this information came from the National Police Security Service in Ireland called the Garda, right?
Okay.
And this information was obtained from a statement, and apparently this comes from a person who survived this ritualistic abuse and states that in the early 70s her parents were Satanists. Now this makes sense to me because if you think of the Dutroux case, the X dossier, and Regina Louf, who's one of the victims of Marc Dutroux, and the Black Baron, Benoit de Bonvoisin, and these pieces of shit that I'm talking about. You read the X dossier, you'll never sleep the same. I'm not fucking with you.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so sick, man. And the level of, they used animals, and it's just disgusting, man. You know what I mean? And to actually do that to another person, but then do that to a pregnant woman, and do that to, a child who like can't even comprehend what is happening to them, and then have another child who views this fellow victim as one of their closest friends in this sort of trauma bond that they've developed, and now they have to play a part in the ritualistic sacrifice of that child,
Mm.
like in using bestiality in these sadistic forms of torture. Like, now it becomes an enterprise. So it's never just, okay, we're going to ritualistically sacrifice a child. No, we're going to uh, exhaust every last available option of how we can essentially, I believe, exploit this opportunity. And that's what effectively takes place, and that's why you have, foot apparently, they film the ritualistic murders and torture for individuals who, this appeals to them. It's one of their forms of, right, of the proclivity that they desire. And so this woman claiming her parents were Satanists reminded me of Regina Louf, because her grandma was the reason she was involved in the network.
Mhm.
This girl had like 60 different alters. Like, she alters, meaning alternate personalities that she had developed
Oh,
over
okay.
time, where they were different people. They had different accents, names that she
Mhm.
legitimately went by, and it was a way to disassociate and also be able to
Yeah.
go into public as a different person. She had an alter called the Whore. It was just, like, terrible, to imagine that this had been developed using a mind control manual and a playbook that had been utilized, where they went and when they raided Dutroux's property, one of Dutroux's properties, which clearly had many, and there was a very major sum that had gone through, that he had seemed that he had received a major payment during the time that he was basically incarcerated, and so yeah, it was obvious that he was abducting children. He was just a low hanging fruit in a criminal enterprise that were clearly involved in, the abduction of children, and using car services as well, which is very interesting because that comes up in the Elm Guest House affair of '82, and it's very similar to that of Miriam Petty and the Finders. But to finish the point I was trying to make on this crazy case in Ireland, because this woman does provide an interesting example and window into the sort of thought process and philosophy behind this. And she basically says that the basically the person would be used for satanic rituals, including herself. She was used for satanic rituals, and the way that essentially it was intergenerational ritualistic abuse. So they would keep the victims alive and use them to actually commit more of these murders on children. And so children are procured, whether from prostitutes within the coven or they're abducted. And they are then used for deity worship, but also there are individuals who require something from the demon, is what they claim. And this is according to this individual statement that was John Wedger himself was a former investigator from Scotland Yard, right? And he basically was targeted because he was essentially attempting to expose pedophile networks that were utilizing this strange jurisdictional exploitation in the UK, where they were like living on boats off the water, so they could technically not be considered, like, because they would have to actually register as pedophiles within the area that they committed their crime. But if they lived off of the like on the water at this certain area, then they wouldn't technically have to register as a sex offender, so they could get away with continued abuse. It was like such a strange loophole that these pedophiles had found, but there
Yeah.
was clearly some strange. And you look into the Netherlands, right, and the like age of consent laws, and why like Francis Sheldon from North Fox Island and that strange network offering they were like running promos in Hermes, the publication, running promos for the Odyssey Foundation, where they had human hunting parties on North Fox Island, legitimately. Like, that is so crazy that Francis Sheldon then escapes any real accountability and flees to the Netherlands, where he's pictured with children on his lap from these orphanages and child care homes. I swear, man. Like, and so
Isn't also over in like I remember reading in one of those books, like I forget if it was like the US or wherever or just anywhere in general, there's like a lot of these places where the laws, the like punishment on pedophilia and stuff, you're like, that's actually shockingly a short amount of time.
exactly. That is
Yeah.
the Netherlands is one of those destinations where they have basically you have to essentially, if you're the victim's parents, you have to like go through basically it's just they essentially disincentivize any real sort of justice or accountability when it comes
Yeah.
to even making like any sort of real criminal allegations in terms of pedophilia, and then the actual process of charging a pedophile with these crimes. It's like it's one of the most difficult convictions to actually achieve, which is so crazy that that would be the case, right?
One would think it should be really easy.
Yeah, you
But
would
it's
think so.
shockingly hard. And then when you get
Right.
charged, it's not that big of a sentence. And
So
you're like,
sad, man.
that's fucking weird.
Mhm.
Yeah, man, all this stuff is fucked up. I don't know. I could talk to you all day. I don't know when you got to go. So if I'm keeping you too long, please let me know. But I do have some things I still want to ask you about. Let's lighten the mood up. We've gotten pretty heavy with child sex cults and all that stuff. Let's lighten the mood with a fun one. According to your Twitter a couple weeks or months ago, Hitler was a hooker.
Oh my god.
I saw you tweet that and I go, I wanted to text you thank you because like I remember the first time I heard like, oh, 9/11 was a controlled demolition. And I was like rolling my eyes, being like, all right, this is gonna be so fun. And now I'm not convinced, but we all know the catchphrase, buildings don't just fall like that. So I don't know. But like the problem with like I'm gonna be straight up. I got into conspiracies because they were fun and hilarious. And
100%.
then and then the more I read, I go, fuck, these are real. Well, not all of them, but like a lot of them are fucking real shit. So like you lose at a certain moment, you lose that fucking like, oh, here's a good one. And brother, when
Mhm.
you posted on your Twitter forever ago that Hitler was a hooker, I go, Austin, thank you. But I never got into it. So I'm sure you're probably gonna do an episode, so we don't have to do the deepest of dives, but please talk to me about this, Austin. This is crazy.
I will say that it's like I think there's plenty of evidence to prove the fact that he legitimately was at so he went to this institution, right? Which is called Pace Walk, Hitler's time at Pace Walk. And it's such a strange story as far as like I believe that potentially the individual who basically um uh I think, what was his name? Forrester or something like that. Let me pull up his actual name because they raided his medical facility where Hitler actually was potentially hypnotized. They claimed that Hitler was under hypnosis by this and it was this specific psychiatrist that was then they raided his facility as far as the Nazi Reich just after they invaded this area and destroyed all his files, and he committed suicide. So it's very interesting and strange that
Mm.
this took place. But let me pull that up in just a
They like
moment.
they like burning books over there at around that time, didn't they?
Right,
I've heard about some
100%.
books getting burnt back then, but I don't remember what that was about.
Right. But I'm telling you, man, when you get into The Voice, Hitler and the voice he heard was basically he called it he had a
Wait,
term for it.
you mean a voice in his head, like on some
Yeah,
Son of Sam shit?
100%. Yeah.
No fucking way.
And he yeah, oh yeah. It's very interesting because he like survived this he was blinded in a mustard gas attack and treated by a psychiatrist at Pacewalk, right?
Okay.
And and essentially this psychiatrist hypnotizes him and suggests that he must recover his sight in order to lead the German people. Perhaps and this is very interesting because the doctor tells Hitler that essentially, perhaps you yourself have the rare power which occurs only occasionally in 1,000 years to work a miracle. Jesus did it. Muhammad, the saints. You are young. It would be too bad for you to stay blind. You know that Germany needs people who have energy and blind self confidence. So, Hitler in Payswalk is written by Bernard Horstman and David Lewis. And it was very hard to come by this, honestly, because the man who invented Hitler is another book as well that explains this hypnosis,
What
right?
was the
That
first one?
it's Hitler at Pacewalk. Hitler
Okay.
in Pacewalk is the name of it.
Okay.
And again, he named the voice Providence, which I found very interesting. And and so he reported hearing the voice when he narrowly escapes death from this French artillery shell in November of 1914. He says he's eating his dinner in a trench with several comrades, and suddenly a voice seemed to be saying to him, "Get up and go over there." It was clear and insistent, and he obeyed automatically as if it had been a military order. He rose to his feet and walked 20 meters along the trench, carrying his dinner can with him, and then he sat down to go on eating, his mind once more at rest. Hardly had he done so when a flash and defining report came from the part of the trench he had just left. This is all according to Hitler specifically. A stray shell had burst over the group in which he had been sitting, and every member of it was killed. And so he believed that he had received a vision. He experienced a vision from another world, during which he was told he would need to restore his sight so that he could lead Germany back to glory. This is what he says.
That's fucking
It's
nuts.
like, honestly, to me, saying that he was guided by this voice, which he referred to as providence, which he, by his own account, says, "Unless I have the incorruptible condition, I do nothing. Not even if the whole party tried to drive me to action, I will not act. I will wait, no matter what happens. But if the voice speaks, then I know the time has come to act." And people get upset because Greg Hallett, he's an author who wrote Hitler was a British agent, and many
Ooh.
people think he's not the most credible source, but
Sure.
it's not he himself who is the only one making these claims, which I find even more interesting, right? Is that it's coming from many different sources, but there was also claims that Hitler and members of the Nazi Reich, specifically the SS, had homosexual tendencies, and it's very interesting, and that's where I got into Hitler potentially, slinging butt pussy in Vienna from 1907 to 1914, right? Like
Well,
legitimately.
well, dude, that's like you said about everyone in the fucking Nazi party were like gay as hell. Like that's dude, I was listening to the audiobook of Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. That's like the standard book about the Third Reich, the Nazi part. And like even in there was like, oh yeah, it was rampant with very deviant. I think they say in the book like the Nazi party was rampant with very deviant homosexuals.
Oh yeah. Now I
Yeah.
know that they practiced they loved,
Which
Arios
shout out to all the gays out there. I'm just saying Nazi gays are fucking up, dude.
Right.
I mean, I know Pride just ended. I'm not trying to ruffle feathers. I'm just talking about Nazi gays, guys. Don't come at me. Sorry,
Oh
go
my
ahead.
god. No, I just know that there was like a they very much romanticized like Helena Blavatsky's work and the Theosophical Society, and Ariosophy was another like this very much like it's this occult theology and doctrine that they practiced, but it
Mhm.
goes back to like there's some ancient Germanic cult, folklore that I think is very interesting, and how they kind of like bridge that gap and very much manufactured a new age esoteric ideological system of control within the framework of the German people and the Ubermensch, and much of it was even couched within like legitimate messaging that you know resonated with the German people, who had been entirely oppressed and clearly ostracized on the world stage at that moment, and
Bitched
so it was
up.
right. And so it was just ripe as far as like you had a fertile ground in this
Yeah.
moment, obviously, and
It was
and
it was
but
prime to get fucked up over there.
100%. But people don't realize like the assassinations that took place, and like the individual who carried out the original assassination on that basically upended the or the German aristocracy at the time and the old order of things, and paved the way for the rise of the Tool Society, and is also directly behind choosing Hitler as their here is the man who will take over that and essentially form the new socialist party of Nazi Germany, and but it was all out of the false framework of the Ubermensch and the Tool Society and this occult doctrine. And the individual who this apparently was a German Jew who desperately wanted to be a member of Tool, and he's the one who committed the assassination on one of the German aristocrats who were essentially kind of like key prominently in power at the time, and created this vacuum that Hitler would fill. But he goes to he goes to actually when he's imprisoned in the same cell that Hitler would then be imprisoned in, which is just like it's
Yeah.
so fascinating that there's a direct connection to all of this. And I think there's no coincidence whatsoever that Hitler would write Mein Kampf in that very same cell, and
Mhm.
that you know I believe the individual who committed the assassination was promised a baronship and like land rights and ownership, and this and he still would never be allowed in the Tool because he had Jewish descent allegedly, but that was a part of the apparently the framework of how the power. I mean, loosely, obviously,
Sure.
but still, it's just like I went into much more detail on Hitler and the Nazi occult episode that I did, because I did cover this to a certain level, and
Oh, you did an episode about that?
yeah,
I'm gonna have
yeah,
to
it was,
listen
but
to
it was a
that.
while back though,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
and
just
that
found out about dude, it's so funny. I feel like I know fucking shit, and then you see a new book and you're like, "Wait, what?" And I saw dude, I was
right,
literally at like there's these dope bookstores out here in Texas called Half Price Books, and it's just what it is. And you walk around and occasionally like a book will fucking pop out, and I just see the one that says Hitler in the Occult. And I used to thought that was just like some fun shit that Call of Duty used to make a fun fucking Nazi zombies game. But yeah,
right, right.
apparently, yeah, there's all this other like extra weird spooky shit that they were trying to
Oh
get done.
yeah.
They weren't just fucking murking Jews. They were trying to talk to the devil and shit. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, dude. The Spear of Longinus, or Spear of Destiny.
Yeah.
There was so much strange shit going on in terms of that regime in general, what they were actually pursuing. New Schwabenland, right? Like going to Antarctica and establishing a Nazi base. Like it was so interesting, and that was all within the framework of pursuing the Spear of Longinus, which he believed would, provide him with. Yeah, it's one of the most interesting stories, because so much of it, I believe, has been sort of immortalized in the fictional theater aspect of the retelling of the story. You have so much Zionist propaganda as well that layers into, throughout World War II as far as the narrative and how it's been very much embraced over the years. And I think it's now becoming a little bit more where in the forefront of people's mind, they're starting to question what really did happen in World War II. That was fucking weird. You know what I mean? Like, is it exactly how they've been telling us? Because it seems like, there was an elite cabal that were funding both sides of the conflict until the moment,
Oh
essentially.
yeah.
Yeah, it's very strange. But you look at Prescott Bush and
Well, no,
how much.
you were sorry. Go ahead, Prescott Bush.
It's just like it's fascinating to see, the banks that subsidize the Nazi regime because, again, it's like these are the
Yeah.
usual suspects, man. They're all a bunch of, Zionists, which is very strange,
Well, dude,
right?
and it goes obviously we know when we know like the big conspiracy on World War II is we're on YouTube, so maybe when we do a Rumble exclusive we can talk about that. But
Right.
like even in like the low grade shit, it's like you find out stuff like Henry Ford bought tanks and jeeps and shit for both sides of the war.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was talking about this earlier I was going to bring this up earlier with Operation Gladio, but it's like you learn about that type of stuff. You learn about Henry Ford buying shit for everyone. You learn about all this other shit, and you're just like, it makes you realize like, oh, history really is just it's like the best guess of the author, because there's just so much like. Basically, if a thing happened, you got to understand there's like an iceberg that has the other 90% of like what's really fucking going on. And yeah, it's all fucking weird and intense, and it just feels like there's a whole other narrative going on that we're not
Absolutely.
fucking hip to.
That's why, like, I seriously consider, and if you do, you're instantly written off as anti-Semitic. But it's like, how legitimate are the protocols of the learned elders of Zion? Like, what they claim that those were meeting minutes from an actual, covert clandestine. I mean, it was meant to be kept secret, but the names were on a list. It was an obvious, as far as just it was the organizing of what really became the Zionist project in many ways. And it was essentially that you had this elite sect of Zionist Jews who really kind of like, it's very interesting because Churchill himself called them the international Jews, and that they had a much more of a different agenda that they were attempting to pursue, and that they were willing to sacrifice as many of the peasant Jew as necessary in order to achieve their goals. And that the way that they view, the as far as just that class divide, it's much more real. This is why I call my podcast The Underclass, because I legitimately do believe we have zero representation, and I'm entirely disillusioned, and that's a beautiful thing. And that doesn't mean there isn't hope for the future. That doesn't mean you can't have optimism to pursue individual sovereignty with your own family and stand on real principles that are valuable and worthwhile, and surround yourself with people who are objectively pursuing the truth and aren't offended for the sake of being offended and conditioned, to a certain point to where they can't even exist in reality in an objective way and
Yeah.
question things with an open mind. Like, no, they would rather remain ignorant, keep
Yeah.
their head in the sand, because it's so, I mean, just consider the task, right? I mean, it's honestly overwhelming, right? When
Yeah.
you kind of feel like you pry back the veil and you see reality for what it is for a moment, and you kind of like can interpret the power dynamic.
That's why I get jealous of religious people. I want to be religious so bad. I'm not convinced. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
obviously I'm not or I don't know about obviously, but I'm not pompous enough to be like I know exactly there's nothing out there. There's clearly, something bigger than us out there, whether it's aliens or interdimensional beings or whatever the fuck. But like organized religion, dude, I wish I could get on board with that, because when you become disillusioned and you realize as it always goes, everything's fake and gay. You're like, man, believing in God looks so fun right now, because I don't know what the fuck is real.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
I think just from my personal path and my own experience as an individual, like I'm questioning everything. And I do not have much value for organized religious structure at all in any real way. But I do think that in I have embraced the mantra that I legitimately, you know, I say thank you, God, anytime I feel proud of something. And
Mm,
I think that's like a way to ground myself. I don't want to allow any sort of egoic mind to take hold. If like, no, I'm like, these are just data points and information that I've collected over time that I value and think is, convinced me otherwise in terms of the power paradigm and made me kind of reflect on what I view is possible
yeah.
in this current state of reality. And that in itself, I mean, this is what I say, I thank God for that ability, for my critical thinking skills, for not falling victim to
Yeah.
this propaganda machine, but also not, you know, for the sake of for the sake of not wanting to have some sort of ideological home or political, let's say affiliation. It's not for that reason, right? I think I'm very much attempting to just honestly interpret just exactly what reality, as far as like
Yeah.
I'm currently always considering what is theater and propaganda and what is not. And so it's just, again, it's like that is such a difficult, kind of like environment to exist in, without
Yeah.
kind of spinning off the planet and losing grasp with reality. And
Well,
that's why it's like I try so much to attempt to, at the very least, remind myself that since when have they had our best interest at heart, in
yeah.
terms of the political class?
Yeah.
And are we seriously going to continue to repeat this, as far as this ridiculous cycle that inevitably results in a very similar consequential outcome? We seem to remain on the same path no matter who is in office and what political
Yeah.
party is in power, and that, to me, that doesn't mean there's no hope. That just means we need to know our common enemy and identify them once and for all and stop infighting over things that absolutely, don't factor in to what matters most. And I
Yeah.
think that when it boils down to what matters most, man, I think attempting to I think having a family at this point probably matters the most, and I'm very much like I think I wanna have a child some point soon, and I have to get out of LA for that, as far as I'm not raising a child out here, but I think, like, honestly, it's it's just trying to manifest your principles in real time on a daily basis and live by them.
Yeah.
That's hope, that's beauty, that's optimism. The outside world remains dark, but that doesn't mean you can't attempt to spotlight, the as far as like what I'm always attempting to pursue is, again, how can I opt out and pursue an alternative system that clearly will, at least at the very least, insulate me from any of the real permanent establishment consequences as often as possible, right?
Yeah.
Because I've said this before, but you know, you and your family are despised by the ruling class, and you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
this time,
Yeah.
it's like policies of mass indoctrination, and intended to disrupt and drive culture while destroying family values. Like that's 100% what we're witnessing.
Well, yeah, and I you see a lot of stuff like that, and there's a lot of like conspiracies correlated to like it's a master plan by a certain group and this and that. And I, still got to do a lot of reading on that, but I have the perspective. I go, brother, if there's not a plan, there might as well have been because we got the same result
Yeah,
with a
exactly,
lot,
man.
yeah, with a lot of this shit. Where, and I'm not, I think there's a lot of great things about modern. Well, you know what it is, I think actually, because I think it's a problem with a lot of people now, and I know, you and me getting to all this like deep level parapolitics shit. I guess there's sort of some irony of me saying this right now, but like a lot of people, people look into all these problems to just like fix the world. I don't know if that's why I'm doing this. I've sort of gotten to a point where I'm just like, I just talk about the things I'm into and whatever, hopefully something positive comes from it. But I think a lot of times, like, people are trying to fix the world and I got to give a shout out to JP again. It's like it's the clean your room shit. And it's like, that's the stuff I try to focus on. So I think also too, for my own sanity, I try to approach this with like a disconnected nature where it sounds fucked up, but there's almost part of it where you have to like trick your brain into thinking it's just like a show, which it fucking is. And you can have this sort of disconnection that keeps your sanity and shit. But because I spend so much time making sure my surrounding, I'm good to my wife, I'm good to my friends, I talk to my parents, not enough, but I talk to them and, make sure everyone's happy and shit like that. It makes everything else. It doesn't make the world better, but I think it makes it more manageable for me. And hopefully there is like some sort of ripple effect that can create some positivity. And I think, I think people need to focus more on just like, where can you affect your general sanity, and then we could figure out the rest later. But it's a big part of it because there is so much, I don't know, there's a lot of darkness in the world. And it's like I was talking to my one friend about suicide or whatever and death, and I go like, yeah, I mean, there's always an argument to like kill yourself, but then they fucking win, dude.
Right.
I'm not gonna let them win. That's what they want me. All the evil forces in the world. That's what they want me to fucking do. You're not winning. I'm gonna stay alive, and I'm gonna have a really good time doing it.
and they would prefer the demoralization to take effect, right? And it's like if you've cultivated worthwhile relationships, and again, you've insulated yourself from the consequential outcome as much as you possibly can, and you're just attempting to, I think, what I just honestly, brother, for me personally, I have to remind myself, because I'm so emotionally involved with a lot of the cases. I have
and
to
with a lot of the
separate
stuff
myself.
with a lot of the stuff you talk about, it's hard to not get like emotional with that shit. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
I was joking before, but I'm trying to get through Eye of the Chicken Hawk, and you're just like, I have to put this down or I'll get violent. It's
right.
fucking nuts.
And that's where I feel very grateful that I have like these, we've achieved some sort of like legitimate networking ability to the point to where like now we are surrounded by like-minded individuals, but to this sort of like optimistic viewpoint to where now it's almost like therapy for me doing Already Dead, because we can laugh at the absurdity, and we
Yeah.
sort of make ridiculous, out of line, you know, insulting and obvious, as far as just sort of trying to bring light to some of the most darkest corners of the world. And I think that that's the way that I can like bring myself out of the darkness personally, is just by hanging out with the homies and and being willing, to make some of these outlandish statements, which obviously the intentions matter more than anything. And that's what I was alluding to when I mentioned the mantra I've embraced earlier. I legitimately every day before I do a show, man, I just I whatever I'm speaking to, call it God, you
Mhm.
know? But it's good, like, I legitimately pray for my heart to be in the right place, my intentions to be pure, and my mind to work efficient and effective, and it doesn't quite work as often as I would like it to, but
Yeah.
I think that if you're attempting to pursue, your craft or live your life, just live your life in general, with that sort of mentality and philosophy, in tow, like, you will usually end up in the right place. And again, it's like it takes a lot of just discipline, I think, to kind of like really just put the proper, again, it's like manufacturing that defense mechanism, but also like there's a reason I remain skeptical all the time, right? You witness
Mhm.
these ridiculous false narratives, even with this Idaho story, right? That's this kid allegedly starts a fire and lures these firefighters out and starts sniping them.
Is this new?
Yeah, it just happened on Sunday.
Oh,
And it's
Jesus
just like,
Christ.
Yeah, when you look into this story,
Dude, I've been out of the loop. I've been out of the loop on some news just because I was just like, I haven't watched a fucking TV show in forever. I was like,
right?
I go through spurts. You know what I mean? I can't
Mhm.
like when I don't know how you guys do it with the like fucking like staying update every day. Like I enjoy more of these conversations and shit because the day-to-day shit drives me up a fucking wall. But I'm sorry, Idaho, what was happening over there?
Oh man. I just honestly I couldn't believe how ridiculous this story was because it turns which by the way, there is I forgot to I didn't even ever make the point that clearly there's actual statements that claim that not only was Hitler a right male prostitute who was under mind control in Vienna, but he also developed into a coprophile, which was a person who's sexually aroused by human excrement. Right, so that was a part of that narrative as well, and it was in this crazy ass article where, yeah, I thought it was hilarious because they called it Hitler's gay roots was the actual that was the actual chapter that I found this in.
That's
And
crazy.
yeah, and of course, like this is considered by many to be like Zionist propaganda potentially.
Okay.
But this is an individual who escaped, Samuel Igra, right, who published Germany's National Vice. He's a Jewish historian. All right, so that is another reason that it's very much been considered to be Zionist propaganda. But so he said homosexuality poisoned stream that ran through the heart of Nazism. And this is where he says in the 20s and 30s, homosexuality was known as the German vice across Europe because of the debaucheries of the Weimar period. Igra escaped Germany in 1939 and claims that Hitler had been a male prostitute in Vienna at the time of his sojourn there from 1907 to 1912, that he practiced the same calling in Munich from 1912 to 1914. And this is interesting because in this book called Napoleon and Hitler, Desmond
Okay.
Seward. Desmond Seward is wrote this, and he says that Hitler is listed as a homosexual in Viennese police records. So it is possible if he's
Mm.
actually named in police records, that would be worthwhile in
Yeah.
pursuing, right? And there's a psychiatrist, right, named Langer, who was commissioned by the Allies in '43 to prepare this psychological study of Hitler. And so his report was kept secret for over 30 years and was later published in '72 in a book called The Mind of Adolf Hitler. And this is where it was written that Hitler was a coprophile, a person who was sexually aroused by human excrement and may have practiced homosexuality as an adult. And they go into apparently how he had like his favorite boy toy, who seemed to be young, very young. So it kind of raised a few questions in my mind, but so it's just again it goes to show, you know what I mean, like there are plenty of other claims that include the memoirs of Bridget Hitler, where she claims this is a fact supported by his sister-in-law, right? In the book, The Memoirs of Bridget Hitler, and the claim was that that Hitler was a British agent, right? Basically, on behalf of like the Rothschilds at the time, who essentially helped create the Balfour Declaration and led the way to the modern state of Israel, and which is very interesting, right? Especially considering how the modern state of Israel it took World War II in 1947, right? And in terms of when it was founded and formed, essentially, so the timing of it all fits perfectly within the protocols of the learned elders of Zion as far as the the playbook and what they were attempting to achieve there. So, but yeah, and that's where in the memoirs of Bridget Hitler it goes into how Hitler spent February to November of 1912 undergoing mind control training at the British military PSYOP war school at Tavistock in Devon in Ireland. So the Tavistock Institute, and that Hitler's sister-in-law describes him as completely wasted upon his arrival at her Liverpool home, luggageless. She says, I had an idea he was ill. His color was so bad and his eyes looked so peculiar. He was always reading. not books, little pamphlets printed in German. I don't know what was in them nor exactly where they came from. And it's been suggested that these are essentially mind control manuals that were gifted to him from the Tavistock hypnosis sessions. And then it goes so
What
far
were
as to
they
say
called?
that, well,
What were they called?
ba-
Tavistock?
yeah, yeah. So essentially, it was
Wait, no, I'm just saying that sounds a lot like the Indian reservation name.
oh, Cabazon Indian
Ta-
Reservation.
oh,
Yeah,
never
yeah.
mind. I'm just
But no,
remembering it wrong.
but no, Tavistock is basically just the Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt School, which we all know is social engineering, where it all really kind of stems from in modern
Yeah,
day, and then went West Coast in the form of the Esalen Institute, basically. But yeah, the Tavistock Institute was, I think it was far more involved in Hitler's account of this hysterical blindness that was treated at Pacewalk, but where he hears the voice from another world. But still, I don't know. This is directly before he infiltrates the German Workers' Party and receives the Tool Society moniker of the Messiah. But yeah, I don't know, buddy. I think that when it boils down to it, they say that even I believe it was who were the individuals? It wasn't just Hitler; it was also Stalin and Freud and Trotsky, and they were all hanging out at the same clubs in Vienna. And it turns
mm,
out that they are all considered to potentially be like legitimate agents who were trained at Tavistock and then placed in their positions in order to kind of like carry out this sort of ultimate political theater on the world stage for the world conflict. You never know. It's
interesting.
definitely a possibility, right?
Yeah,
But if you consider, yeah, and again, I urge people to go and listen to that episode, Hitler and the Nazi Occult, because it gets very strange. I think there's far more to that story, and we've been kind of gifted this storybook version of history that it just doesn't align with what we see playing out in modern time in real time. Like how can we believe the historical framework of things when we see how deceptive the current framework of things clearly is? Like what is the history going to what are the history books going to say about this current reality
well,
we're facing this moment? I mean, I
yeah.
guarantee you. I mean, what is COVID going to look like in the history books? It's like, I mean,
Well, I've talked to people before where I've had this same feeling, and I've talked to a bunch of people that had that same feeling when, like, however you feel, everyone's seen. If anyone's who's being a little bit honest, they've seen enough examples of, they'll be like, it's mostly peaceful out here while a dude's standing in front of a building on fire. Like, they've
yeah.
seen enough examples like that, and they've learned enough about a certain topic to understand biases on that and stuff. And people have realized, like, you gotta, if you gotta, every time a thing happens, you gotta read at least a couple articles about it, and even then you may not have the real story, and then that you sort of extrapolate that to all of world history, and you're like, man, what are the odds that what I'm reading every time, just because it's like dictated the best history book, what are the odds I'm reading what actually happened? Like, obviously, I think, like I said before, the history books are probably like a really good assumption, but there's always so much more going on behind the scenes, and it's why all this stuff's so fucking interesting.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
think what was it, Napoleon Bonaparte, I believe it was, that said, "What is history but a lie agreed upon or a fable agreed upon?"
Mm,
I always thought it was just a perfect quote because it does, yeah, what is history but a fable agreed upon? And
yeah.
I just found it to be too accurate, too poignant within the context of, again, not only the current reality, but what we know to be the false framework of history. All of recorded history seems to be just an ultimate deception, and that's where I've learned to question it all, and not at all be offended or insulted with anyone else doing the same. But
Yeah.
I do think that it's I think it's much more important for us to continue on the path that we're on, which is basically just networking with like-minded individuals, like objectively pursuing the truth in a way that can like legitimately exercise our principles on a daily basis, but also provide us with a way to where we almost have like a strong support system. And I don't have to feel as alone and isolated in my ideas when I'm sitting there reading, original source material and case documents describing some of the worst, brutal, sadistic torture you can imagine.
Yeah,
To the most vulnerable among us. Now I can kind of detach from this,
dude,
take it to
that's
a place
yeah.
where
Go ahead. Sorry.
oh, no, you're good, buddy. I'm just saying take it to a place where we can, at the very least, you know, we can sort of like end in the solution. At the very least, attempt to steer into the solution more often than not. And that's where I get labeled as a black pill just based on I think it's more so just people being a little bit too ideologically imprisoned, right, by this unfortunate two-party delusion to the point to where it's like if you don't fall on one side or the other, then you're viewed as the enemy, and that is a part of the philosophy. I think that's why I believe in the art of war and Sun Tzu, and know your enemy, and
Yeah,
that's why I say that so very often because we all share this common enemy, and we've been convinced that we have only each other to blame.
yeah.
And that is just like how do you climb out of this if that is the philosophy that we're
Well,
all embracing and
well,
living our lives?
that's when I remember realizing I actually never watched Infowars that much, but I've watched a bunch of like Alex Jones interviews and dudes who have been on there in interviews, but I don't actually watch Infowars. But I realized I was like, Infowars is kind of like the perfect name because that's really what it is. Where, you know, obviously these entities are determined and they have a lot of they've got a lot of equipment to do a lot of bad things and all this and that. And everyone talks about even if you're gonna like, oh, how are you gonna fight the federal government? They got nukes and stuff. And it's like, brother, I get it, which is, I'm not saying it's not a tall order, but if you look at
Yeah.
anything, it's and this is why I always go back to Satanist shit, because it's like they get you to do what they get you to do a bad thing, but it's through deception, and like they get you to want to do it. And it's like, dude, there's so many things out there where it's like, if people were just a little bit more hip, if people were just a little bit more aware of like, brother, don't even give the government the benefit of the doubt. Like,
Mhm.
you're safer by being paranoid with like shit like that. And it's like a mentality. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things where you going back to you talking about the two-party system and the way it's like people don't even understand how the government functions, where it's like it's not supposed to benefit you. I don't know if that was the intention, but there's nothing about the framework where it's gonna benefit you and shit
Right.
like that. And it's like, I think so much shit comes from the fact of people are just expecting, in many aspects of reality, people are expecting a thing that's been broken from the start to be like, just fucking work already. And it's like, if you, and because that goes back to your white pill, black pill, you're like, I don't even know if it's like a black pill, but I'm also just saying, like, this mindset we're all in, there's no way it's gonna work. So you do have to have like almost, not trying to use spooky language, but through voluntary, through conversation stuff, almost have a deprogramming of people of like, I swear to God, it starts with like the fucking mindset. You can hack your brain like that in little things. Like, literally, they've figured out, like, brother, if you say nice stuff to yourself in the mirror for 30 seconds every morning, you will have a better day. And it's like, it's like dumb shit like that, but it kind of like, you can see the broader picture of it, where it's like, you know, they always go back to, yeah, they have, the government has all these weapons and da da da. But at the same time, like, there's also a thing of like, well, dude, if you just understand reality a certain type of way, you'll realize what the important things to fight for are. And there will be certain things that no matter what people say, they can't get you to do because you understand the reality of the situation and stuff like that. But
Right.
yeah, man, it's all fucking crazy. This was real great. I think this is a good place to stop, and maybe we fucking do another one of these in a month or so. Not wait a year or two to do another one. because I could talk to you all fucking day, but we have stuff to do, and this was fucking great. Let the people know where they can find your stuff, and yeah, man, we'll get the fuck out of here.
Brother, thank you as always, man. You know I love you, man, and I appreciate you having me on early on to talk about Vegas. Honestly, that was when I first started. Basically, was you were probably my third or fourth interview, I think, and
Oh, really?
yeah,
Dude,
100%.
that was purely just because I heard you on Clint's podcast. Dude, I can't tell you how many times I've poached guests from Clint and Jose, dude. I'm just they're my booking agents half the time.
That's so funny.
But no, I just heard you and like you were talking about the Vegas shooting shit, and I go, wait, what the fuck is that? You know what I mean? I was like, oh shit, and I listened to your podcast, and I was like, oh damn, Austin's like the only one talking about certain things, and you do it in a way where you don't sound like a fucking psychopath. You know what I mean? Like all these fucking conspiracies, you're just like, oh dude, you need to call your mother. You know what I mean? Like you sound like a dude who's like, I think Austin calls his mother. But yeah, man, it's always fun talking to you, and we'll definitely do this soon. Oh yes, the plugs and everything.
Right, yeah, and thank you for saying that because honestly, it was my priority and motivation from day one. Shut up, that's my dog. Sorry, but it is my motivation was always I wanted to one. I felt like certain conspiracy podcasts weren't quite going as far as they could. You
Yeah.
know, and also I wanted to bridge the gap with attempting to provide as much credibility as possible to
Yeah.
these narratives and alternative theories that seem far more plausible than
Yeah.
the official narrative, and that is why I think like it's been my ultimate goal to try and like incorporate every aspect of what could reinforce this alternative narrative in the most credible fashion that would, obviously not force people to sort of just dismiss these alternative narratives at face value, which happens so very often just due to the extraordinary allegations and aspects
Yeah.
of the case. And so it makes a lot of sense, but that was my goal. So I appreciate you saying that because I definitely that is what I'm attempting to do as often as I cover some of these cases. So,
Well, it's
but
everywhere with the conspiracy shit. It drives me crazy. It's either someone who I was like, "Oh, you don't even know what the word due diligence means." Or it's other people the other one that drives me fucking nuts is like when you listen to the one you're like, "Oh, you realize, oh, your existence is to disprove this." And shit
right,
like that. And it's like my whole thing I'm always like you were kind of getting at it where my whole thing that I try to cuz I'm not sitting here being like everyone has to fucking think the way I think. But the message I always try to get out, I go, brother, you'd be shocked how many conspiracies are actually much more reasonable than you could ever imagine. It's like
right,
that, and that's like my big point I always try to get across where I'm like meeting them halfway, where it's like, just understand a lot of these are so much more reasonable than you even fucking realize.
exactly. And speaking in certain terms, people are so quick to do that, and it's just be careful. It's like we so very little that we actually, I think, fully understand.
Dude,
It's like we're always missing certain factors that are involved that
it's the end of fucking oh what's the fuck I forget the author's name, but it's the one she has the great book on like nuclear wars, the Pentagon. Annie Jacobson.
yeah.
She has the one book called like Kill, Capture, Repeat or something like that. I'm
Mhm.
definitely fucking that up.
Mhm.
But she's got that book, and the part at the end, the dude she's been interviewing the whole time about all the like CIA operations, he was like, because they're basically she did it through interviews and sort of like documents that they had to confirm certain things. And she's like, and he's like, dude, between the stuff I've told you and like what's on record, he's like, that might be 10% of everything. Surprise,
Yeah.
Kill, Vanish. Surprise, Kill, Vanish is the book. But yeah, he's like, that might be 10% of everything. So you got to keep that in mind and call your mother. Make sure you have a good make sure you have a good life going on at home. But hey man, this fucking ripped. Underclass podcast already dead. Hit up Austin's Patreon, all that shit. Support the bro. He's doing the goddamn Lord's work. But yeah, man, thanks for hanging out. Have a good one. We will catch you guys later. I'm gonna be on the road. I'm actually going on the road with Robbie. So No
Nice.
streams this week, but I'll be back.